A box, a priest, and a portal to unimaginable terror. Since its premiere in 1987, Clive Barker's Hellraiser has been one of horror's most terrifying and controversial stories. A film that blends pain with pleasure in a story that breaks apart both family and flesh in the pursuit of soul-ripping desire. And in the wake of its success, what was once an adaptation of a short story became a massive franchise, filled with more challenges and failures than maybe any other horror series. To date, there have been 11 Hellraiser films, beginning with Clive Barker breaking into film by adapting his own work, through sequels that attempted to expand a strange and gruesome world into a seemingly never-ending period of straight-to-video schlock, and finally a grasp at new life with a streaming reboot. It's a horror franchise that's made some of the best films of the genre and also some of its worst, all propelled by a dark, unforgettable idea and characters that have terrified generations. But what went wrong with this franchise, or more specifically, who ruined it? And when Hellraiser went wrong, just how wrong did it go? Oh, real wrong, let me tell you. But even then, there's something undeniable about this story that traces all the way back to the horrors embedded in it by Clive Barker decades ago. And in the many years since, no matter how many good or really bad films were made afterward, there's something that drives both creators and fans back to Hellraiser, seeking out what terrified us all that time ago. This is the entire history of Hellraiser, a retrospective that will tear your soul apart. Simply put, there is no Hellraiser without Clive Barker, and while this is a series that quickly got away from the creator and his vision, everything interesting and disturbing about this franchise can be traced all the way back to Barker's 1986 novella, The Hellbound Heart. Originally published in the third volume of Dark Harvest's Night Visions anthology series, The Hellbound Heart is probably Barker's most famous story thanks to its film adaptation and its continued republications in the decades since it was first published. And in its brief 160 pages, The Hellbound Heart captures the essence of Barker's approach to horror: body transfiguration, uncontrollable desire, encounters with otherworldly beings that rip apart our understanding of reality, and mashing them all into something terrifying, boundary-crossing, and controversial. As for the author himself, Clive Barker was born in 1952 in Liverpool, England, and dreamed of being a professional writer from a young age, with an early obsession with horror, human anatomy, and puzzles, including a puzzle box brought back home by his grandfather from the Far East, all finding a home in his future works. By the time he was in high school, Barker was regularly writing macabre plays and created the theater group The Dog Company, which led to his friendship with Peter Atkins, future Hellraiser screenwriter, and Doug Bradley, the man who would be Pinhead. Plays soon morphed into short stories, which were collected into multiple volumes of Barker's Books of Blood, which had enough success to propel him into the film world. However, Hellraiser is not Barker's first work in film. The author wrote the monster movie Underworld and the short story adaptation Rawhead Rex, both directed by George Pavlo, but Barker ended up being really unhappy with both films, finding that his story and ideas weren't appropriately brought to the screen. It was around this time that Barker was writing his novella The Hellbound Heart, but to truly understand this franchise and where it goes, we need to go back to the original story. That's right, once again this Halloween, I'm using movies to make you learn about books. The Hellbound Heart begins with Frank Cotton, a hedonist in search of ultimate pleasure, solving a puzzle box known as the Lament Configuration, and summoning a group of supernatural creatures known as the Cenobites, who submit him to overwhelming sensory experiences before taking him to the other side for an eternity of torment. Afterward, Frank's brother Rory and his wife Julia move into the home. We soon find out that Julia had a brief affair with Frank and has been obsessed with him in the years since. And when Rory accidentally cuts himself during home repairs, his blood resurrects Frank. At first, skeletal remains with nerves and bits of flesh fused into the wall, and then slowly restored as Julia secretly seduces strangers and brings them back to Frank's room, killing them and having Frank feed on their bodies to grow back. Eventually, Frank and Julia's scheme is discovered by Kirsty, who escapes with the box and accidentally summons the Cenobites, making a deal to bring them Frank to spare her own soul from torment. She's able to do so, only to discover that Frank has killed Rory and wears his skin now. In the aftermath, Kirsty contemplates the lament configuration, wondering if the box can somehow open a portal to paradise instead of hell, and leaving her ultimate fate ambiguous. It's a brief but effective novella, focused just as much on physical agony as it is on spiritual longing and a dissatisfaction with our world that leaves a hole at the center of our beings. And I think it's pretty strong. Disturbing, dark, and grotesque, but beautifully written. Any Hellraiser fan that wants to experience Barker's pure, unadulterated work should absolutely read The Hellbound Heart. And as you'll see, it closely resembles the film that followed, and set the vision for the Cenobites. Why then was he so distressed to set eyes upon them? Was it the scars that covered every inch of their bodies, the flesh cosmetically punctured and sliced and infibulated, then dusted down with ash? Was it the smell of vanilla they brought with them, the sweetness of which did little to disguise the stench beneath? Or was it that as the light grew, and he scanned them more closely, he saw nothing of joy or even humanity in their maimed faces, only desperation, and an appetite that made his bowels ache to be voided? Pretty gross. With ambitions to adapt his own work, Barker struck up a partnership with producer Christopher Figg and eventually found financial backing by studio New World Pictures, founded by Roger Corman, and a $4.1 million budget. "I want to direct," said Barker back in 1986. "I've directed in theater and I like working with actors. I like community projects. So we're putting a project together from a novella I wrote called The Hellbound Heart. I did a screenplay from it which I hope to be directing this year. We're going to call the movie Hellraiser."
We have such sights to show you.
Hellraiser, There Are No Limits. A film by Clive Barker.
A British and American co-production, the Hellraiser team was pulled together from both sides of the pond, with director of photography Robin Vigeon really defining the film's dark, intimate look for horror, special effects artists Bob Keane, Jeff Portas, and image animation creating the look and impact of the Cenobites, Frank, and more. Frank's goopy floorboard resurrection is maybe the best effect in the entire franchise. Musician Christopher Young creating a swelling, operatic score that bolsters the sweeping horror behind the domestic tension. And the cast including British actress Claire Higgins as Julia, American Ashley Lawrence as Kirsty, Andrew Robinson, best known as the killer Scorpio in Dirty Harry, as Larry, and of course Doug Bradley as the lead Cenobite, eventually known as Pinhead, in his first film role after years on stage. As a director, Barker has freely admitted that he knew nothing about camera lenses, framing, or the intricacies of daily film work, but found a crew that believed in him and made up for his shortcomings, saying, "The force of imagination behind these things is finally more important, I believe, than knowing the rules, because somebody else can help you with the rules. That's what technicians are for, to say, no, you can't possibly do that, it'll be out of focus. And that's fine, you learn as you go along." Like the novella, Hellraiser follows the unhappily wed Julia and Larry Cotton, who move into the old family home where Frank disappeared. And once Julia accidentally resurrects her forbidden lover, Kirsty, here Larry's daughter instead of a friend in love with him, is drawn into their web alongside the Cenobites, who she accidentally summons by solving the lament configuration. Now, with these beings desiring Kirsty's soul, she must bring Frank to them and stop Julia to save herself. And you know what? Movie's a dang-ass freak masterpiece. This is a story about obsession, love, and dark desires that break the boundaries of our world. But it's also a domestic drama that forms multiple love triangles, with Frank, Julia, and Larry creating cycles of romantic love and hate, while Julia, Larry, and Kirsty break apart the modern nuclear family, with Frank incestuously subbing in for Larry, and Julia as the stepmother, who longs for more than a slowly dissolving marriage and a daughter she doesn't love. Narratively, Hellraiser is equal parts Julia and Kirsty's story, with the film making its switch around the midway point. In the first half, Julia is our focus, and we see her marital dissatisfaction, her obsession with Frank, and how she gives into the darkness, killing many different men to feed her skinless lover, who sucks up their life force with milkshake noises. And once Julia has fully given into the darkness, Kirsty comes to the forefront, discovering Julia and Frank's murders and trying to stop them. This is also where the Cenobites really come into play. Briefly teased at the start of the film, it's more than an hour into it where Pinhead, then simply billed as lead Cenobite, and the rest of the demons arrive, and what a scene this is. Like their glowing phosphorescent appearance in Hellbound Heart, the Cenobites arrive by breaking apart the reality around Kirsty in a bright white, overwhelming entrance into our reality. And it's the exact way these terrifying creatures of pain and pleasure should be presented. Each of the four here are so instantly memorable in their unique, flesh-ripping appearance, with a presence that shows just how out of their league not only Kirsty, but Julia and Frank really are when dealing with them.
We'll tear your soul apart.
See, the Cenobites may be ruthless and all-consuming, but they also have rules, only taking those who open the box and demanding what they deem as rightfully theirs. In some ways, they are the embodiments of fate, the afterlife, and death that everyone lives under. Play your games, indulge in your vices, and try to break the rules, but it comes for us all eventually. And the Cenobites are unforgettable. Lead costume designer Jane Wildgoose took direction from Barker, who had previously illustrated centerfolds for S&M magazines, to create a sort of, quote, repulsive glamour for the monsters. And there's so many great Cenobite designs across the first several films. I mean, who doesn't love Shatterer? Dude seems like a great hang. But it's the Hell Priest himself, Pinhead, played by Bradley, that is truly a horror icon. A terrifyingly scarred demon with an arresting elegance. That was very much an important element to me, that he had this love affair with the English language, said Bradley, which, as a demon from hell, committed to the sadomasochistic disposal of people, struck me as very exciting. When he spoke, it was like an echo of Oscar Wilde or Noel Coward. As far as the lament configuration goes, this mysterious box created centuries ago by Philip Le Marchand is a puzzle to be solved by hands, but truly only accessible by spirits that desire something more. In the Hellbound Heart, it's described as completely lacquered in black without any markings. It can only be solved through total concentration and someone absolutely determined to open it, with the box slowly unfolding and playing an increasingly complex musical melody. In Hellraiser, it's an ornate gold cube that changes shape with each turn, morphing until a magical electricity summons the Cenobites, or, as in the film's super fun Monster Mash climax, is used as a weapon to banish them. I think most people are quick to lump Hellraiser into the slasher subgenre along franchises like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, because Pinhead has been enshrined as one of the instantly recognizable slasher icons like Michael, Jason, and Freddy. But the original Hellraiser and its first sequel are absolutely not slashers. As the franchise goes on, the sequels move much more into slasher conventions and structure, but that's not the case here. And I think that's part of what makes these first two films special. As a horror film, I think that Hellraiser functions much more as a domestic drama combined with an erotic thriller, which then executes its plot through supernatural terrors. And that's what makes it so effective. If you're new to the series, you might be surprised by the fairly small amount of screen time for Pinhead and the rest of the Cenobites. Really, the true villain of the film is Frank Cotton, who manipulates Julia and eventually targets Kirsty. He's the lurking embodiment of lust, corruption, infidelity, incest, violence, and all the sexual taboos suppressed by society. And I think it's really fascinating that Frank, as this half-dead, bloody secret, is literally hiding within the Cotton's house, and not in a dank and dark basement, but in the attic, above the heads of our characters, lurking within the domestic space. When initially submitted for ratings, the MPAA gave Hellraiser an X, which would have doomed it to theaters. So of course, cuts were made, with sexual content, nudity, and violence all needing to be trimmed in various doses to get an R. Not surprising, honestly. It's a film that deals in the taboo, and the blend of all three sent censors into a fit. Still, I think the final cut of the film crosses plenty of social boundaries, but does through implication rather than outright explicit showcase. Really, Hellraiser is a movie that becomes more and more disturbing when you think about it. The mix of pain and pleasure that's offered, the idea that the Cenobites, at least when presented here, can be seen as either angels or demons, and that the afterlife has no true correlation to heaven or hell, the idea that Julia has sex with Frank while he wears her husband's skin everywhere on his body, if you catch my drift. It's all there in the text of the film, waiting to sink into your mind. Hellraiser would be a solid hit on its release of September 10th, 1987, making $14.5 million. But even without a solid profit, New World Pictures was already intent on more Hellraiser, greenlighting a sequel while the first film was still in post-production.
The power is reawakened. The fear is reborn.
Hellbound Hellraiser 2 is like the Super Mario Bros. 2 of Hellraiser movies. I'm not talking the fake Super Mario Bros. 2 to reskin Doki Doki Panic. I'm talking the real Super Mario Bros. 2 that picked up where the original left off and went hard. Bing bong. With Barker and producer Christopher Figg interested in using a sequel and increased budget to explore more of the world that the first could not, Barker would go on to provide the story for screenwriter Peter Atkins to turn into a screenplay. And with Barker focused on directing Nightbreed instead, Tony Randall took over as director of Hellbound. And listen, you know that a sequel means serious business when they put the subtitle before the original title. If the original Hellraiser is a domestic drama approach to horror, then Hellbound is a fairy tale. There's a wicked stepmother, a labyrinth, and a fantasy world that our heroine must journey into to save the day and return to our real world. Here we pick up with Kirsty committed to the Channard Institute Psychiatric Hospital for her ravings and the multiple deaths that happened in Hellraiser. But Kirsty is in more danger than ever as the Institute's founder, Dr. Channard, is already obsessed with LeMarchand's box and is in search of how to unlock it. And with Kirsty's ravings giving him greater insight, Dr. Channard resurrects a skinless Julia in one of the series' most disturbing scenes that I definitely can't show on YouTube. From there, Channard and Julia consume souls and manipulate one of their patients, the mute genius Tiffany, into opening a portal to hell with the configuration. And the entire film transitions from gothic horror to hellish fantasy as Channard, Julia, Kirsty, and Tiffany all enter the other side, a dark labyrinth of hell ruled over by the indefinable Leviathan. Structurally, Hellbound echoes the original, with Julia now taking the place of Frank as our major villain, and the Cenobites only being unleashed by the midpoint of the movie. Except that Dr. Channard is just as much a villain, and the second half of the film moves into the afterlife labyrinth that we never saw in the first. Tonally, Hellbound is more operatic and gothic, full of disgusting asylums, dark passages that wind on forever, thunder and lightning crashing, and an afterlife that morphs to torment the living with an unknowable god at its center. The terror of Hellraiser 1 comes from glimpsing something beyond our reality and seeing how it easily corrupts our flesh. Hellraiser 2 lays that surreal new world bare. In some ways, defining the undefinable limits its possibilities in horror, but I think Hellbound does an excellent job at keeping the Cenobite afterlife strange, twisted, and unable to truly grasp. Alongside that expansion of lore is the brief reveal of Pinhead's human form, hinting at him once upon a time being a British soldier before the configuration changed him. Part 3 would explain more due to budget cuts keeping extra scenes out of this film, but here, Pinhead's humanity is ultimately his undoing, with the Cenobites reverting to humans and killed by Channard, who has been transformed into a pretty annoying Cenobite directly controlled by Leviathan. Honestly, I'm a little surprised that Pinhead lost here. I know he's not much of a physical fighter, but the dude loves to spam that chain attack. It would be really annoying to fight him and smash. But guy like me, I'd get in close, hit him with a few elbows into the bridge of the nose, and then I'd lock him to the kata hajime. You know, I get it in there real tight with the legs wrapped around too on the ground, and then I'd make that guy tap out right in the middle of the labyrinth. In the larger context of the ongoing series, it's kinda insane to see Bradley's character weakened and destroyed, seeing as he essentially becomes the figurehead of Hellraiser. But that's because Barker wanted to make Julia into the main recurring villain of the series, turning her from human antagonist in 1 to supernatural seductress in 2 to full-on Cenobite leader in 3. But Higgins didn't want to come back, having never been a fan of horror. I totally get it, but it's a shame as Higgins as Julia is one of the best parts of these films, and everything afterward is missing a crucial part of the story. But this is truly Kirsty's story now, and with the more personal events of the first now behind her, Ashley Lawrence plays her as a more mature and fully capable heroine who's fighting to escape the Cenobites, get revenge on Julia, and save Tiffany. When you combine her story in Hellraiser 1 and 2, I think Kirsty Cotton is easily one of the best final girls in horror history. The sheer challenge of what she has to overcome, the stakes of what would happen if she fails, and the ways in which she outwits both humans like Julia, Frank, and Channard, as well as the legions of the Cenobites are really awesome. Having Kirsty wear Julia's skin to trick and stop Channard is fucked up, but also rad as hell. It illustrates just how far she's willing to go while still being a good person who is ultimately uncorrupted by the forces of hell. If there's any weakness of Barker's that's exposed by Hellraiser 1 and 2, it's that he simply doesn't know how to write an interesting, more conventional, normal person as a love interest. Both Steve in the first and Kyle in 2 are just so boring. more there for plot convenience than any real contrast against Julia and Frank's horrifying romances. These characters will immediately slip from your mind when thinking about these movies. Hellbound may be extremely dark and with greater stakes than ever, but much in the vein of a fairy tale, it has a happy and satisfying ending for Kirsty and Tiffany, who not only escape the labyrinth and return to the normal world free from the asylum, but also conquer Hell's forces, with Julia, Channard, and all the Cenobites destroyed in the process. Of course, there's a hook for more, via a really silly and cheap-looking column of souls, but our heroines are free. As a sequel, Hellbound works really wonderfully as a double feature with Barker's original. Two sides of the same coin creating a really spectacular story that exists as a complete narrative. Every horror fan should watch the first two Hellraiser movies. They are incredible. The rest of the franchise, well, we'll get into that from here, as Hellbound would make $12 million against its $3 million budget, giving life to more stories even after Kirsty's tale had come to a close.
The terror returns in mankind's final confrontation with evil.
Following Hellraiser 2, Clive Barker, New World Pictures, and Barker's production company Film Futures would all hit massive troubles. Propelled by the success of Hellraiser 2, Barker would go on to direct Nightbreed, an adaptation of his lesser-known novel Cabal, and a movie that would derail his directing career. The story of Nightbreed's production is a big ol' mess, but what's important is that Barker's film was heavily interfered with by 20th Century Fox and underperformed at the box office. As a result, Barker's reputation as a director took a major hit, and Film Futures went out of business. Separately, New World Pictures filed for bankruptcy, causing the rights to the Hellraiser franchise to be sold to Dimension Films. Now, Dimension might be a familiar name to you if you're into 90s and 2000s horror. Founded in 1992 by real-life Cenobites Bob and Harvey Weinstein, Dimension existed as a label under parent company Miramax Films, mostly focused on producing horror movies. And while Miramax was acquired by Disney in 1993, Dimension was still basically free to do its own thing, going on to make The Crow, Scream, Halloween H2O, The Faculty, and a lot more highly influential teen-focused horror movies of the time. You probably already know that the Weinsteins quickly became infamous at first for campaigning hard for Oscars, then how they made everyone that worked with them miserable, and finally for Harvey's criminal convictions for rape and sexual abuse amid countless women coming forward about his assault. So really, how Dimension ruined Hellraiser is pretty low on the list of the terrible things they did. It's just our focus today. And the company's very first release was Hellraiser 3: Hell on Earth, written by Peter Atkins and Tony Randall and directed by Anthony Hickox, then known for the Waxwork movies and asked to please make a more serious film by Barker. Hell on Earth picks up sometime after Hellbound, with Pinhead separated into two beings: his original self, the soul of World War I Army Captain Elliot Spencer, and his dark half, Pinhead, still stuck in that pillar that now looks a little nicer and more presentable. But beyond a cameo and a videotape made during her stay in the asylum, Kirsty Cotton is long gone and safe. Thankfully, I really love Kirsty and I just want good things for her. Instead, our lead is ambitious New York TV reporter Joey Summerskill, played by Terry Farrell, who investigates why a club goer was ripped apart by chains. Very strange. That usually happens in Jersey. You can see where this is going. Soon the Pinhead Pillar falls into the possession of art dealer and asshole J.P. Monroe, who begins to feed people to the Pinler. Hellraiser 3 is a movie with rocks for brains, but my what a lovely sound they make. This movie is so fucking funny. It tries really hard to be a dark and mysterious follow-up to part 2 for the first hour and then just says, screw it. Here's exploding manhole covers and CD Cenobite. And honestly, it's a great time. It's the extravagance of part 2 mixed with the dumbass action of the 90s Super Mario Bros. Movie. Hickox is just a more cartoonish, over-the-top director, even when trying to tell a serious, dark movie. Hell on Earth is silly and wild, and what was once legitimately disturbing is now much more fun and crazy. There's still some ideas of the taboo and sexuality mixed with violence, but now Pinhead and the Cenobites are straight-up slasher villains with supernatural powers. There's some in-universe explanation though, with the spirit of Captain Spencer telling Joey that Pinhead now has no governing rules or limitations after they've separated. So the movie is free to go wild, with the villain killing an entire club, attacking cops on the street, and turning innocent people that never used the configuration into tech-themed Cenobites. The two are eventually recombined and Joey buries the configuration in wet concrete, only for a future building to reflect its design. Also, a quick note, but this is the first time that Pinhead is actually called Pinhead on screen. And while we all know the character by that name, it's kinda silly to hear him called by it on film. Best known to keep him unknowable and unnamed by our characters. It's hard to take any of these villains seriously, but I like the new wrinkles added with Spencer's origin shown in full, and the battle to reunite the two sides in order to end the chaos. It's big and wild and feels more in line with traditional, more mainstream appealing horror of the time, even if that precipitates the franchise losing more and more of its identity in the following years. And the strategy worked, with Hell on Earth making $12.5 million when released on September 11th, 1992, and paving the way for more.
He never dreamed that this simple toy was the key to the gates of hell.
In the entire history of Hellraiser, the biggest swing and the biggest missed opportunity is Hellraiser Bloodline. But even if the script and the film aren't perfect, the people that are really to blame are Harvey and Bob Weinstein and Dimension Films overall. Following the solid performance of Part 3, Clive Barker's suggestion that Part 4 be set in 3 different time periods was accepted, and turned into a full screenplay by Peter Atkins. 1996's Hellraiser Bloodline, no more numbers in the title starting here, spans 3 generations and follows the bloodline of the LeMarchand family, and takes place in 3 time periods. 1796, where Philip LeMarchand is commissioned to create the lament configuration by a French aristocrat with a love of sexual violence. 1996, where architect John Merchant has built the lament-style building seen at the end of Part 3 and is targeted by Pinhead. And 2127, where space engineer Dr. Paul Merchant has summoned the Cenobites onto a space station for a final confrontation. And honestly, that premise is rad as hell. Given that we're tracking the LeMarchand family through the generations and their encounters with the Cenobites, Bloodline is telling an epic story of a family trying to redeem themselves and destroy Pinhead. It's by far the most lore-heavy film in the series, adding in the character of Angelique, a non-Cenobite demon that acts as an opposition to Pinhead, only to be turned into a Cenobite by our spiky fella during the story, as well as a new puzzle, the Elysium configuration, which creates perpetual light as an inverse to Lament. Of course, with a new future-set sci-fi section, Bloodline is jumping the shark in the same ways that Jason X and Leprechaun in Space do, going to the stars when there's nowhere else left to go. And Bloodline is the end of the Hellraiser story, with Dr. Merchant actually successfully, permanently killing Pinhead and closing all portals to hell with a giant space station that turns into the Elysium configuration. Still, we got plenty of time before we actually reach 2127, and by my calculations, if Dimension had continued making sequels at the rate they did in the 2000s, the studio would have been able to make 26 more Hellraiser movies. But I bet they could have got to 40 if they really put their minds to it. The thing is, while Clive Barker loved Atkins' screenplay and convinced special effects artist Kevin Yeager to take on the film as his first directing gig, the producers at Miramax hated the completed film and demanded large amounts of changes and reshoots directed by Joe Chappelle and written by Rand Ravitch to feature Pinhead throughout the movie. He originally had a limited role, push Angelique out of a lot of the film's second half, which I think hurts the movie a lot, trim down the plot, and give it a happy ending, chopping down a 110-minute epic work print cut to an 85-minute theatrical cut. And the theatrical film just ends up feeling like it never quite gets to the highs you'd expect from this type of story. The Cenobites are silly, the kills are weird, and the final act in the future is incredibly rushed, which undercuts the satisfaction that should be felt by the end. Due to the sheer number of changes demanded by Miramax and Dimension, Yeager requested that he be credited as Alan Smithy on the film, a long-standing practice by Hollywood directors with the Directors Guild of America, who no longer want to be associated with a film that was essentially taken away from their creative control. And honestly, it's not like Bloodline is terrible, but it's quite clearly a compromised product that has been chopped apart and sewn back together. And that causes the final film to lack the impact and satisfying narrative that a 3-act, 3-time period movie really needs to pay off the scope of the story. With a box office of $9.3 million against its $4 million budget, Hellraiser Bloodline was profitable, but a clear indication of diminishing financial returns. And so, with the company wanting more sequels but unwilling to take big risks, Hellraiser soon became a direct-to-video content machine. Boy, YouTube would love that.
All hell is about to break loose again.
What do you want from me?
When I first decided to make a Hellraiser video, I originally thought to title it The First 4 Hellraiser Movies. You can't make me watch the rest, you're not my real dad. Obviously, I'm covering them all here, but the first film that really bridges that gap is Inferno. And you know what? It's really not that bad of a film. It just sets a really bad precedent. Hellraiser Inferno is directed by Scott Derrickson and written by Derrickson and Paul Harris Boardman, and is actually Derrickson's first feature film, giving him his first big break after years of script doctoring. And while Derrickson would go on to much bigger and more successful films like Sinister, Doctor Strange, and The Black Phone, you can see a lot of his ideas on penitence, punishment, and supernatural horror colliding with real-world villainy on display right here. Inferno follows Detective Joseph Thorne, played by Craig Sheffer, who, if you're anything like me, and I know I am, you'll immediately recognize from years of watching One Tree Hill. A corrupt cop with a penchant for drugs and hookers, not necessarily in that order, who finds Le Marchand's box. Soon, Thorne is on the trail of a serial killer called the Engineer, who targets victims connected to Thorne while also repeatedly meeting with the psychiatrist Dr. Gregory. By the end, the big reveal is that Detective Thorne solved the configuration at the start of the film and has been in hell this entire time, with the events all happening in his mind and exposing how his indulgences have slowly killed his soul, with our protagonist doomed to repeat the cycle for eternity. It's a pretty good, dark story that I think is elevated by Derrickson, still coming into his own but already a pretty solid director. However, the release of Hellraiser Inferno as a direct-to-DVD film in the year 2000 is really the start of the second and much worse phase of the franchise, setting the template for a lot of films to follow for good and bad. The big drawback is that the movie simply looks cheap, which is kinda unavoidable at a $2 million budget always intended for home video. But that will be the case from here on out. The other defining aspect is that given how Bloodline essentially brought the larger story to a close, the following movies have to tell a contained story that doesn't really intersect with the larger narrative. Hellraiser, alongside other fallen horror franchises like Children of the Corn, The Prophecy, and From Dusk Till Dawn, was stuck on video at Dimension. The shameful little secret of the company shoved off to the side while the attention and money was given to Scream, Scary Movie, and Halloween, which itself was nearly shoved into the straight-to-video vortex. Debuting as a simultaneous VHS and DVD release on October 3rd, 2000 from Buena Vista Home Entertainment, Inferno was a solid hit. And here comes the shit.
Welcome, Hellraisers. Invitations. That's what I'm talking about. I wouldn't touch that.
Following the release of Inferno, the Hellraiser franchise continued to limp on in the direct-to-video market at Dimension, condemned to a sort of half-life as a series that didn't have the budget to truly excel where it needed to, but also not allowed to simply rest in peace because the studio wanted to hold on to the rights. And this is what's really important to understand what happens next. Like a lot of film deals at the time, Dimension's deal with the rights to Hellraiser meant that the studio had to make a new Hellraiser movie every 5 years, or else the rights would revert to original holder Park Avenue Entertainment. Now, 5 years to make a movie isn't that big of a time crunch. You can make plenty of movies from concept to full execution, editing, and premiere in way less than 5 years, and they can be great. The problem with Dimension is that they never really cared about making a great Hellraiser movie. All they really cared about was holding on to the rights, convinced that someday, further down the line, they would finally make a big, profitable Hellraiser film that would go back into theaters. It just wouldn't be right now. So instead, they'd wait until the rights were about to lapse and then squirt out another direct-to-video movie. Repeat cycle for the next nearly 20 years. The result is two distinct periods that I'll lump together for the sake of us all. The first period is composed of Hellraisers 6 through 8, all directed by Rick Boda. Boda? Boda D's nuts! Oh, got him! Oh my god, I have so many more of these movies to talk about. These are made with a variety of writers and are composed of Hellseeker, released in 2002, Deader, released in 2005 after being held for several years after it was completed, and Hellworld, also released in 2005. It was around this time where Dimension Films moved out of Miramax and into the Weinstein Company, keeping Bob and Harvey Weinstein fully in charge of Hellraiser. Unfortunately, Hellseeker is the worst of the Boda-directed films, made worse by its direct connections to the actually good Hellraiser movies. Here we pick up in the aftermath of a car crash that has seemingly killed Kirsty Cotton, played by a returning Ashley Lawrence, and follow her husband Trevor, played by Mayhem himself, Dean Winters, who is plagued by hallucinations, memory lapses, and pinhead jump scares. If the near-death experience and wonky reality doesn't already spoil a twist for you, I'm gonna right now. Turns out Trevor has been dead the whole time. Cue dramatic music. And we find out that he's a total asshole and serial cheater that tricked Kirsty into opening Le Marchand's box once again to try to get rid of her. But when old Pinhead came to claim the one that got away, Kirsty made a deal. 5 souls in exchange for her 1, killing 3 of Trevor's mistresses and his friend Brett before shooting him while driving. Very unsafe. And so Trevor is now in hell and Kirsty is free, never to be seen in this franchise again. It's just not very good. Besides covering a story type that was already kinda done in Inferno, it's also cheaply made and repetitive. This really didn't have to be a Hellraiser movie, and beyond not liking Kirsty turn into a murderer, it's a film whose entire existence is trying to surprise you with a twist you can see coming from the start. Not good, Pinhead. Next, Deader takes us to the land of cheaply made sequels, Romania. Here, reporter Amy Klein is sent by her sleazy newspaper to uncover the truth behind videos apparently showing a cult killing and resurrecting their members. Known as Deaders, the cult is led by a man named Winter, who is a descendant of Philip Le Marchand and seeks to use the power of the box to control the Cenobites. Eventually, that leads to Amy being killed and reanimated by the cult and eventually summoning the Cenobites, with Amy killing herself to avoid being claimed by Pinhead. And despite being deep into DTV Hellraiser and defined by an uber-edgy early 2000s aesthetic, I think the Deader is totally solid. It's not going to live up to the first few, but I think there's some good effects and scares, alongside a mystery plot that ties into our lead character's tragic past of abuse that's brought back to the surface by her resurrection. Finally, we have Hellworld, starring a young Henry Cavill, young Catherine Winnick, and a slightly less old Lance Henriksen. And honestly, I'm not sure what's more ridiculous about Hellworld. The fact that the film revolves around a video game that is based on Hellraiser and has Pinhead and all the Cenobites as enemies, or the fact that the game isn't even really part of the story here. Come on, movie. Suck these characters into a 64-bit Hellraiser game and give me some delicious trash. Instead, the film sees a group of friends invited to a Hellworld party in a spooky mansion years after the suicide of a member of their group, caused by liking Hellraiser just a little too much. A cautionary tale for anyone that likes more than 4 of these movies. But of course, this is an evil party, and our group is picked off one by one. So obviously, Pinhead has been summoned by the game and is here for revenge, right? Well, no. It's actually the father of the dead guy, played by Henriksen, who wants revenge against the people he blames for his son's death. And there's not actually a party. They're all stuck in coffins and tripping balls. Let's just move on. Besides Boda as director, what ties these 3 films together is that none of them were written to be Hellraiser films. Instead, each began life as an original screenplay that was bought by Dimension and eventually turned into a Hellraiser movie to keep the franchise going. And once you know that, you can really tell. Hellseeker plays as a sort of Jacob's Ladder or Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge riff that is eventually revealed to be orchestrated by Pinhead, which is not how the Cenobites operate at all. Deader is focused on a resurrection-obsessed cult that is revealed to be using the lament configuration to bring themselves back to life, which is not how the box works. And Hellworld is just a twisted revenge scheme that's shown to be one big mass hallucination, with Pinhead not actually involved at all until our main pointy man shows up at the very end. Technically, canonically correct, just very disappointing. Altogether, I would say that these 3 films aren't good, but they're pretty silly and entertaining to varying degrees. It's nothing memorable, but it's the kind of thing you can slap on in the background. With Boda's time on the franchise coming to a close, that brings us to the second phase of this whole direct-to-video debacle, and some of the worst movies not only in this franchise, and not in horror in general, but some of the worst movies that I have ever talked about on my channel. I don't love talking about bad movies and just bashing them. It can be fun for a little bit, but I never wanted that to be the entire purpose of my channel. But it is part of doing these franchise retrospectives, so thanks, Hellraiser.
There's hell to pay.
The second and last period of Dimension's straight-to-video sequels contains two films, Hellraiser Revelations in 2011 and Hellraiser Judgment in 2018. And I really mean it when I say these movies are god-awful, but each terrible in their own unique ways. Together, these two sequels help solidify Hellraiser as one of the worst horror franchises in history. Obviously, there are many people responsible for getting a film made and many moving pieces that need to come together not just to make a good movie, but make any movie at all. It's a massive challenge, so you can never truly credit a single person for a great film, or blame a single person for a bad one. But both Hellraiser Revelations and Hellraiser Judgment are written by Gary J. Tunnicliffe, and Judgment is directed by Tunnicliffe too. So it's this guy right here, officer. Get him! Hellraiser Revelations looks like it was shot at an Airbnb over a holiday weekend and has no discernible value as a piece of art. It all starts as a found footage film, before moving on to a dinner where the families of two missing boys, Nico and Steven, come together 1 year after they went missing during a trip to Mexico. Meanwhile, Pinhead, looking like he got stung by a whole bunch of bees, and now played by Stephen Smith Collins with Fred Tatasciore providing the voice, lurks around in a single dark room they must have shot in one day, getting some cutaways every so often to remind you that this is a Hellraiser movie. And well, what do you know? One of the boys is evil and the other was turned to a Cenobite and almost everyone dies. What's really most important about Revelations is that the film, after all that other shit, finally caused Doug Bradley to leave the Hellraiser franchise for good. With Dimension once again running out of time on rights and shoving another film in front of the camera, Bradley said, "Following these discussions and after reading the script and giving it due consideration, I have decided not to participate. The ink is barely dry on the script, and it is scheduled to be in front of the cameras in 2 weeks' time and in the can by the middle of next month, September 2010. The minuscule shooting schedule is more than matched by the budget. Whether or not this means that someone else will be stepping up to play Pinhead, I have no idea. I guess we can watch this space together. One way or another, this does not seem to me to represent a serious attempt to revive the Hellraiser franchise. However, I wish everyone who will be directly involved in the making of this film good luck with it." That means that 2005's Hellworld is the last film to feature Doug Bradley as Pinhead, never returning to the role in any official capacity in the 20 years since. And looking at Revelations and Judgment, I cannot imagine that Bradley was mad about that. If there's one thing to be said positively about Judgment, it's that after years of placeholder films, the movie is trying to add something new to the world of Hellraiser. Here, it's the introduction of the Stygian Inquisition, led by the Auditor, a processing unit within Hell that weighs the souls of the sinners for their eternal torment. There's also an angel. Anyway, this expansion of Hell's bureaucracy intersects with our Earthbound story, focused on several detectives on the hunt for a serial killer, with the reveal that our lead detective is actually the murderer, which puts him in the crosshairs of Hell. Our detective story plays like a really cheap knockoff of David Fincher's Seven, while our Hell scenes are probably the most disturbing of the entire franchise, trading in fleshy torment for fountains of and hey, look at that, it's all getting blurred out here. It's really unpleasant. Not in a 3 edgy 5 me kind of way, but in a sorta barely disguised fetish of the creators kind of way. And with new sects of Hell and a heavenly representative, Judgment is throwing all sorts of new ideas at the viewer, but in service of what? And so, with Dimension once again churning out a truly terrible direct-to-video sequel and meeting the bare minimum to retain rights, it seemed as though the cycle would continue on forever. That is, until Clive Barker himself, now officially qualifying as one of only 5 men I've ever loved, swooped in to save the day by invoking the United States Copyright Act of 1976, which provides authors with the opportunity to recapture rights to their work from publishers after 35 years. And while Barker's copyright claim was met with resistance by Larry Cuppen, who had purchased the Hellraiser rights from New World Pictures when they went bankrupt, on December 1st, 2020, the case was settled, with Barker winning back the rights and bringing an end to the never-ending punishment of Dimension DTV sequels. Thank you, Clive, for ending our suffering from all these terrible Hellraiser sequels. Leviathan bless you. And that at last brings us to a new Hellraiser reboot that helped to restore and bring a little quality back to a long-suffering franchise.
It has 6 sides, 6 configurations. It opens up, and it cuts you. And then they come to collect.
While the film simply titled Hellraiser would eventually be released in 2022 as a Hulu exclusive, the road to rebooting the franchise starts all the way back in 2006. At the time, Clive Barker announced that he would write the remake for Dimension Films following the lukewarm back-to-back releases of Deader and Hellworld. However, over the next 5 years, the film was rewritten multiple times by several different teams, but every single creator clashed with the Weinsteins behind the scenes, causing each new idea to be thrown out and the film delayed further and further. These delays would inevitably push the movie until the rights were close to expiring, leading to Dimension rushing another slapdash Hellraiser sequel out on video. Repeat cycle. In fact, it kept happening for so long that Clive Barker was eventually announced to come back to the franchise yet again to try and write another remake in 2013. Obviously, that never went anywhere, and in the time that followed, Dimension continued to squirt out their terrible direct-to-video sequels. All the while, it was alongside a promise that the studio would someday finally make a big-budget, honest-to-God, decent remake of the original movie. Thankfully, Dimension simply never got around to remaking Hellraiser, so when Barker finally reclaimed the rights to the series, there were a lot of different ideas thrown about. But the first officially announced plans were for a Hellraiser TV series that had David Gordon Green, Mark Verheiden, Michael Dougherty, and Barker all attached. However, there was basically no more news on the show after it was announced in 2020, and focus was eventually shifted to a new entry, simply titled Hellraiser, at Spyglass Media Group and 20th Century Studios. Produced by Barker, David S. Goyer, and others, and directed by David Bruckner, coming off The Ritual and The Night House, with a script by Ben Collins and Luke Piotrowski. And despite the title and all those years of attempting a remake, 2022's Hellraiser is a brand new story, taking some touches from the original too, but restarting the world with some new rules and focus. Here, our main character is Riley McKendry, played by Odessa Azion, a recovering drug addict living with her brother and his boyfriend, who soon finds Le Marchand's box in an abandoned warehouse. Riley soon solves the puzzle, but avoids being stabbed by its hidden blade, and in turn, the Cenobites take her brother, pushing her to continue to solve the puzzle and provide sacrifices to bring him back. One of the changes made in this new Hellraiser is that Le Marchand's box is almost a trap, shooting out a spike when opened up. Whoever is jabbed is used as an unwitting blood sacrifice, placing the Cenobite's target on the unlucky individual. Even a Cenobite who gets stabbed by the box ends up killed because rules are rules. This places a very different logic behind the lament configuration. Rather than the early film's statement that it's desire and not hands that call to the Cenobites, here it's purely dictated by blood. I think that's less interesting, but it gives a different dynamic as each sacrifice changes the box's configuration, moving through 6 shapes, and by the end, the puzzle solver is granted a gift from Leviathan. You see, just like money in the Hellraiser reboot universe, blood and suffering can be exchanged for goods and services. That also means there's a struggle over the box's ownership, with our group eventually learning that millionaire Roland Voight has tricked Riley into solving the box so that he can claim ownership of it and get this super annoying giant piece of machinery that's pulling on his nerves out of his body. Like, seriously, how is this guy supposed to close deals with this thing punched through him? Cenobites have no understanding of business. And overall, I think that Bruckner's Hellraiser is a solid, serviceable refresh for the franchise. A decent story, good effects, solid writing, kills that make you squirm, a nice mystery pushing along its new approach to the lore, and Jamie Clayton as the new Pinhead is a nice touch, with Clayton giving her own spin to the character to distinguish it from Bradley's take. I just wish this film was lit in a way that let me see what the hell was going on. It's also strangely clean. Them first few Hellraiser movies looks like if you touched them, a lot of dirt and slime would come off on your hand. Here, clean as a whistle. The biggest weakness of the movie is that it's really avoiding the taboos and desires that make Barker's original story so unforgettably scary and boundary-pushing. Yes, the Cenobites are here to torment, but there's nothing attractive or sensual about their methods. There's no draw for our characters, so instead they're simply violent demons taking unwilling victims. Giving the Hellraiser franchise new life in a more prestigious but direct-to-streaming approach kinda puts this franchise in a weird place. Fan reception was more positive than the last decade or two of movies, but it wasn't glowing, and it's always sorta impossible to tell how many people exactly watched it. As of this video's release, Bruckner has apparently had meetings about a sequel, but nothing concrete has emerged. Outside of film, Barker has gone back to the story of the Hellbound Heart multiple times over the years, supervising the short story anthology Hellbound Hearts, having a sequel novella called Hellraiser the Toll written by Mark Allen Miller, and writing a full-blown sequel himself, The Scarlet Gospels, in 2015. The Hellraiser franchise's next big installment is in the form of a video game. The first ever dedicated one for the franchise, titled Hellraiser Revival and produced by Saber Interactive. There's no set date yet, but it's a survival horror game. Thank God it's not another asymmetric online multiplayer game that will be abandoned and lose the rights in a year, set in the continuity of the films. Honestly, it looks awesome, and who knows how these things will turn out, but it gives me a lot more hope for the Hellraiser series than I've had in a long time. And whether it's in the form of a video game, movie, or TV show, Hellraiser at its best is an incredibly provocative, deeply disturbing horror movie about the intermingling of lust, hatred, sex, death, pain, pleasure, flesh, spirit, and a mind-melting force that breaks apart families, lives, and souls in the process. It's not a slasher, it's not a haunting, it's not even entirely supernatural, but at its best, Hellraiser embodies horror that truly gets under your skin. And finally, as I do with every retrospective, here's every Hellraiser movie ranked from worst to best. At 11, Hellraiser Revelations, the 9th film overall in this franchise, and the first with a Doug Bradley replacement, who doesn't work at all here. This is a completely bland, interchangeable film that isn't really making all that many interesting choices, and is just trying to shoehorn in the found footage aspect, at least at the beginning, to try and differentiate itself a little bit, because it is just taking place in the blandly lit interiors of a McMansion. So I would say this is a movie for no one, that no one needs to ever watch, and even if you love Hellraiser, you don't need to watch this one. Also, at the end, our surviving final girl, who has seen all of her family and friends ripped apart by demons caused by the lament configuration, starts to decide to just open up the box by herself too, because what the heck, seems like a good idea. I don't understand. That's a terrible ending. At 10, Hellraiser Judgment. The one where an already edgy franchise tries to push things a step further by throwing a bunch of wet, rotten filth at you and doing it over and over. This is also to make up for the lack of interesting story anywhere else in this movie, because it is, after all, a huge Seven ripoff that is not interesting and is not well shot, and it has no memorable characters with any arc besides finding out that one of them is a bad guy and then sort of having a final confrontation, and then you throw in some extra Cenobites and everything with the Stygian Inquisition, and an angel that's just a blonde lady in a sports coat, and then you kind of get the finale, and then there's some more, poop and pee and vomit kind of thrown everywhere at you, and kind of a really grungy, dirty looking room, and that's the gist of this movie. It's also terrible. I hate it. And it brings down the entire franchise even further, along the lines of some of the worst in horror overall. Thank God they rebooted. This makes anything in comparison look like a great time. At 9, Hellraiser Hellworld. Oh my goodness gracious, where even to begin? This is the video game Hellraiser one, except that there is no Hellraiser video game in this movie. It's only alluded to. And I sort of wonder if the creators of this movie even know what a video game is. They seem to only ever vaguely kind of talk about it. I'm sure the budget had something to do with that, but I would have loved to have seen them get sucked into a spooky, scary Hellraiser video game. That's the hook. That's the idea for the movie. It's stupid, but at least it's different and would probably be entertaining instead of this just being a wild and sexy party, right? And then the whole reveal of this being a mass hallucination and there never actually being a party. What a disappointment. Imagine you get invited over to a party at your friend's house and you think there's going to be a bunch of great times, people, food, alcohol, whatever, and you're gonna, dance the night away, and then you get there, and it's just Lance Henriksen shoving you into a coffin. What a bummer. It's one of the worst endings in the entire franchise. It is still somewhat entertaining and memorable, and it has some good actors in it working with bad material. Some of the kills are okay, and it is, empty-headed, nothing going on beneath the surface kind of fun. And at this point in the Hellraiser franchise, why not? At 8, Hellraiser Hellseeker. This is the point where the franchise totally turns into direct-to-video slop, and I think that the worst thing about it is just shoehorning Kirsty Cotton in here and bringing Ashley Lawrence back for an absolutely nothing role, and really kind of diminishing the character of Kirsty post 1 and 2, turning her from this great heroine of the first 2 Hellraiser movies into someone that went into a loveless marriage and then has to kill a bunch of people to save herself. And there's no heroism involved. There's just a lot of people acting selfishly and a lot of misery. Also, this movie thinks that it's so smart in trying to trick us into not knowing what's going on when it's using one of the oldest story types in the book. This type of story has been told in novels for hundreds of years, and here we're supposed to be like, oh, I wonder what's happening. It's like, he's dead the whole time. I already got it. I kind of figured that out in the first 5 minutes, but now we got to wait another, 80 minutes for the twist to be revealed. Oh boy. This is really the demarcation line in the Hellraiser franchise. As number 6, this is the point of no return, really. And no one that likes the first few but doesn't feel committed to watching the rest needs to watch this. At 7, Hellraiser Bloodline. Probably the Hellraiser movie with the most missed potential, Bloodline is still entertaining in that whole sort of held together by string and bubblegum sort of way, where you can see where all the difficult editing and the behind-the-scenes drama and all the sort of stuff that was cut out of the film really showing up on screen for really anyone to see, as long as you're slightly aware of the movie-making process. All the stuff that's cut out really hurts the story, and it undercuts a lot of the stuff going on here. In particular, the demon character of Angelique is totally screwed over by the studio interference. But you do still get like French aristocrat Cenobites and, some modern drama with the family. And then you got, pew-pew lasers in space. And somehow, Pinhead's ultimate weakness is pew-pew lasers. We should have found that out way earlier, and this whole thing could have just been wrapped up by the end of Hellraiser 2 permanently. Never have to see this guy again, shot you with a phaser, goodbye. And really, this is falling apart really hard by the third act. It is still a lot of fun if you just shut your brain off and don't think about how in this movie we have completely dropped everything that was interesting with the first 2 films. At 6, Hellraiser Deader. Terrible title aside, I think that Deader is a pretty solid film in the back half of the Hellraiser catalog. Of course, it's obvious that this is a completely unconnected story with the Hellraiser branding slapped on top, but once you get past that, I think it's a solid little mystery with some really messed up stuff that happens in the second half, and a pretty tragic protagonist at the center of it all that propels the story forward and turns this into a very dark film by the end. Push aside the DTV aesthetics, the early 2000s edge, or you can enjoy it for what it is and, think of it as a time capsule. But in any case, it's entertaining, it's solid, it just didn't really need to be Hellraiser. At 5, Hellraiser Inferno. There's no denying that Inferno is cheaply made and being put together on a pretty minuscule budget and probably a pretty small crew, but director Scott Derrickson is clearly trying his best and trying to add some style and deeper meaning to a movie that you could probably catch at 1 in the afternoon on the Sci-Fi Channel. Still, it's pretty cool that this is a demonic neo-noir sort of. And once you get on that wavelength, I think it's pretty entertaining and has some good twists and turns. It's also way less violent than any of the movies that came before and some of the movies that came after, and it's a pretty hard shift from the crazy, gory schlock of 3 and 4, and that by itself makes this movie a lot fresher in the larger context of Hellraiser, and a fun time overall. At 4, the Hellraiser remake. This is a totally solid, sturdy, and well-made reboot to this franchise that looks even better coming after so many terrible, terrible movies that don't have the single drop of quality that this movie has in just how it's shot and the quality of actors overall and the way that everything is executed. It's well made, it's disturbing when it needs to be, has some good effects, good gore, good kills. I like Jamie Clayton as Pinhead. I think that's a nice new twist on the character. And overall, I like where the characters go and sort of the sacrifices that they make and what they choose to do with the lament configuration, how they intersect with this millionaire character. It takes a few different interesting shifts, whereby the second half it sort of turns into a siege film with Cenobites outside as they're protected inside this mystically protected mansion. But I just wish that it went a little bit further in its ideas, that it had a little bit more to say about maybe the torment or addiction of its characters. Of course, that it was lit a little bit better so that I actually see what is going on, and that maybe we were pushing a little bit more into the taboo to get back to what really made Hellraiser 1 and 2, and even a little bit of 3, interesting and resonant, because beyond that, this is more just a straight-ahead demonic monster movie. At 3, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. This movie is dumb, but it's really fun. And it's even dumber than you might actually think, just because of the way it's sort of this, it's almost a meathead approach to the Hellraiser movies. We're far past the elegance of the first two. We're far past the fantasy of those movies. We're not really that interested in the taboo or what it's saying about the sexual relationships between men and women or these ideas of sadomasochism. They're all kind of pushed aside and more put into aesthetic and set dressing and pushing these characters into big crazy monster archetypes. I mean, CD Cenobite with the guy with Cenobite with CD with Cenobite with CDs in his head that he throws and he kills because now they're super sharp and fast. Or we've got the video producer that gets a camera embedded in his head and he can punch holes in people with the camera lens. And then we've got a Cenobite that breathes fire. There's all of these sorts of like really, really dumb and silly monsters going on here. But I think that's the general appeal of this movie. It's here to have fun, be crazy, kind of go beyond the scope of the first two, bring it out onto the streets of New York, and have this huge monster attack happen. It's a fun time. Don't take it too seriously, and you'll like Hell on Earth a lot more. At 2, Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. I mean, this thing honks. This is the elevation of everything in the first one, and a wonderful end cap to everything that was started in the first Hellraiser, turning it into a fairy tale, turning Kirsty into one of the all-time great final girls in horror, making everything a little bit bigger and wilder, a little bit more gross, a little bit more of a bigger budget. The scope is so interesting. Going into the Hell Labyrinth is really freaky and wild. Leviathan as this sort of overlord that you can never understand is an interesting way to keep sort of the Cenobites removed from our definition and our understanding, and I really love what it does with the lore and how we are pushing into the further consequences and the dynamics of everyone. And Julia comes back and is awesome here as our full-fledged villain. Gennard is a little annoying, especially as a Cenobite. He's got a super annoying laugh, and I don't love how easily he takes out the rest of the Cenobites. I think it kind of undercuts everything that we've really been interested in with Pinhead and the rest of them. But still, this is the story of Kirsty as our fairy tale heroine going into the dark labyrinth, going into the other world, and coming back out stronger and with everything that she needs for herself, saving the day. And I really, really love it. Together, Hellbound and Hellraiser, the original, make a wonderful pairing that I think if you like the first one, you should absolutely watch the second. Fantastic double bill. And this is, alongside what comes next, the high point of the series by far. And it's something that I think every horror fan should watch. And at number 1, the original Hellraiser. How could it really be anything else, right? This is a movie that is about our suppressed desires, dysfunctions within the familial home, the ways in which relationships break under pressure or under suppressed sexuality. We've got Julia, who is both the protagonist and the antagonist of the film, Frank as this looming threat who is also weak, and this avatar of corrupted desire. We're pushing into ideas of sensuality meets pain. Kirsty is this amazing final girl that really rises to the occasion by the the end, especially in the last few minutes where all the Cenobites are attacking and she's trying to ward them off with the configuration, and it becomes this really crazy, big and wild monster mash. It's super fun compared to the other 85 minutes of this movie that are really, really dark and disturbing. It's just a nice little light, fun burst of energy at the end to take you out of everything, and I really, really love that about the film. And beyond that, with the Cenobites, we get this, mind-blowing look into the afterlife and the horrors that await people there, the ways in which the Cenobites are beyond our definition and our comprehension, and the ways in which they judge and sort of empower this dark sexuality of our characters. It's really crazy. It's an amazing film. It has so many different layers going on. I think that Hellraiser the movie is an improvement on Barker's Hellbound Heart novella because it really fully realizes all the characters that may not have fully happened in the novella, and it elevates characters like Kirsty and elevates the Cenobites and brings more into it, makes it scarier, more grotesque, more exciting, more tragic, and I really, really love the way that these ideas are brought to life on screen. It's incredible that this was Barker's first film that he directed because it's so well done. Of course, he has an amazing team with him. It is an all-time classic of horror. Obviously, it's propelled an entire franchise far past when it should have expired, but it is amazing. The best film in the franchise, one of the best horror films of the 80s, one of the best horror films of all time, a personal favorite of mine, and I have had a pleasure exploring Hellraiser. And with that, we come to the end of my journey through Hellraiser. And frankly, a retrospective I put off for a long time because I didn't want to watch so many bad movies. But you know what? Most of the bad ones are at least entertaining. And I think that shows how, even when the Hellraiser series has lost the meaning and horror of Barker's original vision, it's still an effective, one-of-a-kind take on supernatural horror. But all those sequels and the continued hopes of fans are also a testament to the impact of Barker's original vision and the love for the first few films in this franchise. Will Hellraiser ever get back to the quality and terror of the films we love all these years later? It's impossible to say, but no matter how long it may take, Pinhead and a world of terror will be waiting. Thanks for watching today's video, and I hope that you've enjoyed this exploration of the entire history of the Hellraiser franchise. And I thought that there could be no better way to cap off the Halloween season with this deep dive into one of the best and worst horror franchises of all time. Hellraiser, to me, includes some of the best horror movies ever, and also some of the worst. And in doing so, it's really kind of hard to define exactly what is this franchise overall when you're taking into account everything past the first two, or maybe the first four. Beyond that, there's a couple decent ones, a lot of so bad it's good, and some that are just truly, truly terrible. Still, I will absolutely always love the first two Hellraiser movies, and enjoy 3 and 4. Pinhead, Julia, Frank, Kirsty, these are amazing antagonists and protagonists within horror, and I think they really elevate what is a very deeply disturbing concept at the core of this franchise into something that is more enjoyable, something that you can get on the ride with, and something that leaves a lasting impression and makes you want to come back again and again. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Hellraiser franchise, which ones you like beyond the obvious 1 and 2, and what you would like to see for the future of this franchise. Obviously, I'm very interested in the Hellraiser video game, and I hope it's really good. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a patron or member, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and exclusive reviews, with 3 exclusive reviews voted on by patrons and members for the Halloween season. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and having a happy Halloween.